All right, I think we're just about ready to get started. Good afternoon again, and welcome to this spotlight talk on the Barnegat Bay map. My name is Maria. I am the Visitor Engagement Manager at the Esherick Museum. I'm joined today by Communications and Public Programs Director, Katie Wynn. So I hope that you've had the chance to view some of these virtual programs that we've been doing over the last year and a half or so. We've been having a lot of fun with them. Every month we do a spotlight talk. That's a roughly 20-minute deep dive into a particular piece or group of pieces, or maybe even a topic related to our collection. So next month, to coincide with the opening of the exhibition Daring Design, the Impact of Three Women on Esherick at the Michener Art Museum, we will focus on some of the photographs of Marjorie Contents that are in our collection, excuse me. This month will also mark the kickoff of a brand new Junior Spotlight spinoff series that we're going to have on our Facebook and Instagram. Beginning with the Barnegat Bay map, which is the subject of this program, of course, we will periodically be making short companion videos to give elementary school age children their own close look at the piece of the collection being highlighted in that particular month. So for this one, I'm going to talk about what makes a map and do a little guided close looking and a map making exercise. So keep an eye on our social media for that one. That one will be coming soon. Also next month, we will have the next in our Curator Conversation series, which will be a conversation between our Director of Curatorial Affairs and Strategic Partnerships, Emily Zilber, and Jennifer Nava-Milliken, Artistic Director at the Center for Art and Wood. They will be discussing, among other things, the show that's on view through October at the Center for Art and Wood titled Out of Bounds, The Art of Croquet. And they've got a couple of Esherick pieces in that show, so definitely check that out if you're in the Philadelphia area. And of course, we hope that you might be able to join us at the Esherick Museum in person for a tour. You will need to make reservations first, so you can do that and read our safety guidelines on our website. So returning to today's program, we are going to bid an unofficial goodbye to summer today by taking this virtual trip to the Jersey Shore, which is a favorite tradition for many of us in the Philadelphia area, including Esherick himself. I'm going to introduce you to this print itself and talk a little bit about Esherick's early years spent sailing in New York and New Jersey. And then I'm going to hand it over to Katie, who's going to give you an even closer look at the map and talk about some more of Esherick's adventures at the shore and the influence that they provided to his work. We ask that you please keep yourselves muted for the duration of the program. If you have any questions, you can go ahead and put them in the chat. Our Director of Curatorial Affairs and Strategic Partnerships, Emily Zilber, is standing by, so she can help you with those. We're going to do our best to address as many as we can, and we can always handle more in the follow-up email. Otherwise, we've set aside a few minutes at the end of the program, so if you prefer to unmute yourself then and shout them out, go ahead and do that. We'd love to hear from you. So let's dive right in, pun intended there. As you may know, Esherick was born to a wealthy family. The family had a beach house in Longport, New Jersey. There's this great story in his biography, which was written by his son-in-law, about Esherick's father, George, buying his sons a boat, which Esherick describes as a double-ended rowboat. He says George counseled his sons, don't ever go down near the inlet. Now, I can't say for sure, but I assume that he's talking about the Barnegat Bay Inlet. And of course, that's just what they did because they're teenage boys. He says, we'd upset that boat about 4 times a day. Take it and drag it up to an island and upset it and get all the water out again. Put the mast in, put the sail and everything in and start off again. But that's where we learned to sail. Nobody taught us. That's the way to learn how to sail too. As I've always said, unless you learn how to sail before you're 12 years of age, you'll never learn. So he starts sailing young, and it's so interwoven throughout his story, and of course, by association throughout his work. So can you guess where he spent his honeymoon? Wharton and his wife Letty were married by Judge J. Willis Martin, who also had a beach house and a 38-foot motor sailor, which he had loaned Wharton and Letty for their honeymoon trip to New York. So of course, Worden had pencil and paper on board and recorded the trip in this fascinating honeymoon journal, which is the subject of a blog on our website called A Late Summer Honeymoon Cruise, which we can link you to. So quite frankly, this piece in and of itself could have its own spotlight talk. It's really interesting. I've got just a couple pictures of it here for you. On the left, the cover page, the Wywerna 3 is the name of the boat. So this log titled The Log of the Cruise of the Wywerna 3, or in better words, that honeymoon, which I thought was just such an interesting insight into his sense of humor. My favorite detail is I don't know if you can see my mouse, but at the top right, this Cupid looking really defeated and exhausted. Notice the mermaids towing the boat too. Both of them seem to allude to this really intense storm that they hit on the return trip. Gale force winds and hail, so it seemed like it was quite an adventure. On the right, the final page of the log where Esherick details he and Letty wrapping up their trip and pulling the boat out at the Philadelphia Yacht Club, excuse me. I love the final line here. And if the good ship never does another cruise, she knows she has been good and faithful to these newlyweds on this late summer honeymoon cruise. So in June of 1925, the Eshericks head back to the Barnegat Bay with, among other guests, Theodore and Helen Dreiser. Theodore Dreiser, to anyone who may be unfamiliar, was an American novelist known for his important role in this literary movement that was marked by more realistic and less kind of Victorian and proper subject matter. Esherick and Dreiser were firm friends. They had met just a year earlier at the Hedgerow Theatre, and Dreiser was the inspiration behind a number of Esherick's pieces. There's another great blog post called the Dreiser-Esherick Camaraderie, which is a great read for further reading on this really interesting relationship. And it will give you a peek at some of those pieces as well. So on the left here, we have Dreiser himself, of course, and on the right, Esherick, Dreiser, and some friends, sometime a few years after this 1925 trip to the shore at Esherick's original farmhouse, just down the hill from the museum here in Paoli. So that brings me back to the star of our show here, the map itself, meant to commemorate this 1925 trip, very well recorded, just like the honeymoon. There are so many fun details in this map. I love the sailboat in the water on the left here. There are animals kind of hidden throughout. There's what looks like a whale up here and a fish down here and this little bird. And I love the train coming across the bay. Notice the squall of wind on the bottom right corner too. That one almost escaped me. So that's all I have for you, but I'm going to hand it off to Katie now, who's going to give you a closer look and some more details about this 1925 trip. And again, a look at some of the inspiration that sailing had on Esherick's work. So take it away, Katie.
Hi, hello everyone. Thanks again for joining us. Thank you so much, Maria, for that great introduction and some of the details in that map. I think, as you pointed out, the portrait of the man who is the squall, I think, might be my favorite there. But as Maria said, this map was done in 1925, and that same year, Dreiser, Esherick, and a number of other folks took a big trip to the shore. And Esherick, after that journey, sort of similar to what he did with the honeymoon journal, he annotated the map. He wrote notes about all of their adventures and all of the things they did during their time there. And then he made multiple copies. So this one is in our collection at the museum. There is one that presumably he gave to Theodore Dreiser, that's in the Dreiser papers at the University of Pennsylvania. If you compare the two, they essentially have all the same notes, but of course, since it's handwritten, you can tell that each one is a unique piece. In these notes, you're seeing, as a journal would have some of the details of their trip, the day they arrived, who arrived by train versus car. In addition to Dreiser and Esherick, who actually arrived a few days before the rest of the crew. Esherick's wife, Letty, and his daughter, Mary, both joined them at the shore. Helen Richardson, who later became Helen Dreiser, was there, as well as a friend, Mary Peck, and Skipper Dilly, who I don't know much about, but they're all listed along the bottom there. And then the other notes that you're seeing here kind of detail the different things that they did, and you can see how each one kind of tails back to a particular location on the map. So Honeymoon Cove, they're crabbing for their supper. Somewhere else along North Point, they get a mess of oysters. And so you can sort of follow around and see some of the things they did on this trip. Not all of it is entirely, factual, like strictly informational in that way. Some of it is a little more poetic. So one of my favorites is in that red ink along the top. He says, on the North Point, we anchored. Like children barefoot, we ran the sands, warm and soft, sea enticing us, garments cast off, plunged and played, through underbrush briar to clams digging, like puppy dogs to get a dinner, not noticing old Sol was scratching our back. And the old Sol there is another term for sun. So I think he's saying they got badly sunburned on that trip. And in fact, in the book, Wharton Esherick and the Birth of the American Modern, which has a nice chapter and some information about this print, the research there showed that Dreiser actually had to delay the publication of one of his most famous books, An American Tragedy, because of how badly he was sunburned when he was at the beach with Esherick. So sunburns are real, is what we're learning there. And if you go to the next slide, Maria, we'll see that Dreiser is not the only famous friend that Esherick is headed to the shore with. Not on that particular trip, but at other times he would go with Henry Varnum. And so you're seeing a couple of photographs here. On the left is Henry Varnum, Bessie Brewer, which is, she's an writer, and his wife. And then Letty Esherick is the one lifting the fish up over her head there, very proud of the day's catch. On the opposite side of the slide, you're seeing Wharton and Henry Varnum. You can see Poor is sort of sketching in the background. And then in the center is actually a sketch that Esherick did. And he's having a bit of fun with his friend Henry. And whether this happened or not, he's certainly illustrating him as this sort of bumbling moment where he's fallen overboard in his effort to catch these crabs. So again, that sense of humor comes through. If we head to the next slide, we'll see a couple more sketches. These ones you can imagine he had a more serious, more studious face on, like Henry did in that last photo, where he's really capturing some of the things that he's seeing on the trip. The way lots of us might take photographs, he's out there sketching. And so on the top there, you're seeing a figure lying on the beach. That was done on a trip to Barnegat Bay in the 1940s with Jasper Dieter from the Hedgerow Theater, as well as some other friends. And then on the bottom left, there's one called Cedar Creek. You can kind of picture him up in the dunes there, looking down towards the water. If we went back to that Barnegat Bay print, we could see Cedar Creek is one of the waterways that he marks on there. So it's also right up in the bay. And then, of course, Lighthouse at Barnegat on the right, which is, a very well-known landmark in that area. And so in addition to this sketch, which I think is wonderful at the way he kind of fills in the sky with this fractured mark making, we also have oil paintings and things in our collection as well, where he revisited that again and again. In the next slide, so as I mentioned, he revisits things in paintings, which obviously you're not, an oil painting you're not going to do at the beach maybe, but you can bring those ideas home. And he certainly did that in his printmaking as well. There's way more beach themed prints than we could put in this presentation, but I just picked out these two. not realizing once I put them next to each other that they would both have these very similar kind of sweeping lines heading off into the distance. So on the left is Bright Mariner, which is a fantastic illustration that he made for a book of a poem by the same title that was written by a woman named Catherine Garrison Chapin. It was actually a rather moving poem that she wrote when her son had passed away at a young age, and he had really enjoyed sailing. And so he illustrated a few different pieces for that book. And then on the right is Surf Fishing from 1927. We don't know for sure that that is happening in the Barnegat Bay, but likely it is the Jersey Shore because it's prior to some of the other kind of water scenes that he did in Alabama a few years later. And there's certainly a lot of surf fishing happening down at the shore. So it's definitely a scene you might see there. But you can really get the sense of, on the left, that feeling of the open expanse of water and sky, and that the kind of freedom that we all enjoy when we get down to the ocean. And on the right, I think you really get the sense of the tides and that movement kind of pulling you back and forth. And then lastly, I wanted to share just a few examples of how Esherick pulls the same inspiration into his woodworking. Thank you, Maria. Certainly you could sort of take that sailing and you know, use that lens to look at all sorts of things in the studio. And in a very general sense, Esherick's his appreciation for these beautiful curving wood surfaces, and really how tuned in he is to the sense of smart storage and how to really make the most out of small spaces is something that without kind of writing a thesis on that or making it explicit in anything he says, you definitely have the sense that he's drawing from you know, the cabins of sailboats and those kinds of spaces in his designs. So I've included the bed on the right there as a great example of that storage space with the drawers underneath. He does that with his sofas as well. So it's certainly not just this piece. And then other times he's really being more explicit with the connections to the shore and to sailing. One of my favorite examples is this, on the left, you have starboard swinging light and port swinging light. So these are poplar booms with this hanging shade that's made of English walnut. And the boom or the arm that you're seeing there can swing, so you can position the light wherever you want it. And really it mimics the sort of tiller of a sailboat that would move the rudder. And so there's a reference there, but if that's not enough for you, he also colors the wire for each light. So you have a green one for the starboard and a red one for port, which is, I'm not a sailor, but that has to do with the navigation system that you would use to come in and out of harbor safely and sort of orient yourself if you're traveling by ship. So he's definitely making a reference there in the swinging lights. And then lastly, I included a picture of the kitchen on the next page, because this, I think, is where so many of us on tour, if we hadn't noticed it before, you notice it here. With the curving counter and the polyurethane there, you really have the sense of the sort of galley of a sailboat. He's got lips on the shelves that are over to the left of this photograph. So that kind of detail is something that on a sailboat, of course, you would need it to keep everything from sliding off of your counter. So here it's safety, but it's also just a little reference to that lifestyle. And then if you look out the window here, you're seeing the railing of the deck, which I think a lot of people have remarked really feels like the bow of a ship. So you're sort of sailing off into the forest here. So I think it's certainly clear as you sort of take in all these different aspects that, you know, that feeling of being out on the open water and being in those nautical spaces definitely left its mark and sort of sparked his imagination and his designs. The very last slide is just for fun. This is his daughter Mary in front of Lucy the elephant, simply because it is such an iconic shore tourist spot. I couldn't help but put it in here. She's just adorable there. So with that, I think that's all we have in terms of slides. Thank you all so much for joining us and kind of taking this little summer vacation with us here. And we're definitely happy to answer some questions if anyone has anything they want to share or any questions about anything we looked at today. You're welcome to unmute yourself. If you prefer to write it in the chat, you can do that too.
I have a question. When you showed us the annotations on the map, it was red, you know, the overall. So was it an overlay that he wrote on, or I was confused how that worked?
Great question. Yeah, actually the paper is red and the print is green.
Okay.
So he did the print as a black print on white paper, and then he also did it as green on that red colored paper.
Oh, thank you.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Any other questions or thoughts? Has anybody been to any of those places before? Iconic, right? Yeah.
Well, you called this series spotlights, but it's really insights. I mean, you offer so many insights into his work, and just that last bit about the scene in the kitchen and the rim around the, I mean, that's, I feel like I have such a deepening appreciation of his thinking and his inspirations and everything. It's really amazing. And especially to have the whole series, you know, to keep learning more and more and more, and deconstructing who he was as an artist and what his muse was, and not only his body of work, but the motivations behind it, or at least the likely interpretations we can make. It's really fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I mean, if we couldn't ask for more in terms of how it's connecting with you, and that you're tuning into these, you know, interested to keep coming back to them. We love it. We love it. Fantastic. Do we have any other questions or comments that we want to throw out before we head back into the sun and the rest of our day here?
I'm in Minnesota and it's pouring rain,
Oh.
which we are thrilled about because we are having a horrible drought this summer. So I just feel like going out and splashing in the puddles.
You could do that too. Wonderful, wonderful. Well, thank you again. Thank you so much for your comments. Thank you for joining us. Maria and I had so much fun putting this one together. It was the perfect sort of cap to our summer over here. So we hope you join us for future ones, and keep an eye out for that follow-up email. We'll share some of those blog posts and things that we mentioned.
And our tradition is to unmute yourself and say a big goodbye all at once.
Goodbye. Thank you very much.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Well done.
Thank you.
Thank you.